Welcome to another deep dive. And today we're going to try to understand something I think we all struggle with, those sneaky thinking errors that can really trip us up, in life and work.
Right.
And we're diving into Rolf Dobelli's book, The Art of Thinking Clearly,
Yeah.
which is packed with almost 100 ways our brains can kind of mislead us.
Yeah, it's really amazing how many ways we can get tricked by our own thinking.
I know, you might be surprised how many of these mental traps you've fallen for yourself.
Absolutely. I find myself catching myself all the time.
Yeah, yeah. And what's so intriguing about this book is that it takes this via negativa approach. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, the via negativa, it sounds a bit like a, yoga pose or something like that.
Right.
But it's actually a really powerful idea from ancient thinkers. And it basically means learning by understanding what not to do.
Okay, so instead of focusing on what we should be doing,
Right.
we can learn a lot by understanding what we should avoid.
Exactly. And in this case, we're not trying to cram our brains with more information. Yeah. It's more about learning to avoid these common thinking errors.
So it's like a mental detox,
Yeah.
clearing out all those bad thinking habits to make room for, better decisions. I like that.
Yeah.
But why do we even make these errors in the first place?
What all comes down to our brains essentially running on outdated software.
Outdated software.
We evolved to survive in a world of immediate threats where quick reactions were key. Imagine our ancestors out on the savannah. Our rustling in the bushes could be a delicious boar or a hungry tiger.
Oh, yeah. You wouldn't want to stop and ponder the situation too long with a tiger charging at you.
Exactly. So our brains are wired to prioritize speed over deep thought in those situations.
Yeah.
A false alarm is a lot less costly than, being eaten.
Right.
But in our modern world, those instincts can sometimes backfire.
Okay, so our Stone Age brains are kind of messing us up in the modern world.
Yeah, in some subtle ways.
So how do they do that? Dobelli dives into a bunch of specific errors, right?
He does. He does.
Let's start with cherry picking. I think we're all kind of familiar with this one in some ways.
Yeah.
Like, think about those glossy hotel brochures. They only show the perfect beach views and conveniently leave out the construction site next door.
Right. We're pretty savvy to those marketing tricks.
Yeah.
But this same bias can creep into areas where we expect more objectivity. Like think about annual reports
Okay.
that highlight the wins while downplaying the losses. Or research papers that cherry-pick data to support a particular conclusion.
It's almost like a magic trick. You think you're seeing the whole picture, but really you're only seeing what someone wants you to see.
Exactly.
Have you ever noticed this happening in your own life?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Maybe when you're making a big decision.
Yeah.
Are you getting the full story or just a carefully curated version of it?
That's such a good question to ask yourself, because it can really, have a big impact on the choices you make.
It can. And Dobelli even makes this provocative argument that the anti-smoking message has been more beneficial than all cancer cures combined.
Yeah, that's a bold statement,
It is.
but it really gets you thinking.
Because it's all about prevention.
Right. We tend to get really excited about the latest cure or treatment, but sometimes the simplest actions, like, choosing not to smoke, can have the biggest impact.
Wow. So how can we be more aware of this cherry-picking trap in our own lives?
It's all about cultivating that critical eye. Ask yourself, who's presenting this information? What might they be leaving out? Are there other perspectives I need to consider?
Okay, so speaking of information overload, let's talk about the news illusion. Now, I consider myself, a pretty well-informed person.
Right.
But Dobelli's experiment of giving up news for 3 years really made me question my habits.
3 years.
He makes a really compelling case that staying informed can actually be a disadvantage. What do you think?
Well, he argues that news is like junk food for the brain. It's easy to consume, but it doesn't really nourish us. It's often sensationalized negative and designed to trigger our emotions rather than, inform our rational decision-making.
Yeah, he even challenges readers to recall just one news item from the past year that genuinely improved their lives. Can you think of one?
It's a tough question.
It is.
Because most news is really irrelevant to our daily lives, and yet we spend hours consuming it.
We do.
Think about how much time you spend scrolling through headlines and news feeds. Could you be using that time more productively?
It's a real wake-up call. Are we actually staying informed, or are we just filling our brains with noise?
It's a good question. It's not about becoming uninformed. It's about being more selective and intentional.
Right.
What information truly matters to your life and helps you make better decisions? That's what we should focus on.
I like that. Now, for a real head-scratcher, Dobelli says that statistically, speed demons have fewer accidents. Wait, what?
That sounds completely backwards. I know it's totally counterintuitive,
It is.
but it highlights a thinking error called the intention to treat error. So think about it this way. If we're only looking at drivers who completed a certain trip, the faster ones, by definition, couldn't have had an accident during that trip.
So it's all about how the groups are defined.
Exactly.
The slower drivers were on the road longer, so they had more opportunities to get into accidents.
Makes sense.
You're right, it does.
And this error can pop up in all sorts of research, making things seem really counterintuitive.
Okay, so how can we spot this error?
It's all about being really critical of how groups are defined in any study or analysis. Ask yourself, what are the missing pieces that might be skewing the results?
Okay, so we got to look for what's not being said.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to one of my favorite topics.
Okay.
The power of incentives.
Ah, yes.
You know that idea that rewards can sometimes backfire spectacularly?
Oh, yeah. Dobelli calls this incentive super response tendency.
Yeah.
Basically, people are highly responsive to incentives, but not always in the ways that we predict.
Right. And Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner, put it perfectly. He said, get the incentives right.
Love that quote.
It's like that classic example that Dobelli shares. It's about the British colonial government in India. They were trying to reduce the cobra population, so they offered a bounty for dead cobras. What do you think happened?
Oh, man. I can already see where this is going.
Yeah.
People started breeding cobras, right?
They did.
Of course, they saw an opportunity to make money, and they responded accordingly.
Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Right.
It's a hilarious example of how well-intentioned incentives can lead to completely unintended consequences.
And it happens all the time. Like Dobelli mentions another example of a daycare center. They were trying to reduce late pickups, so they introduced fines for parents who were late.
Okay.
And guess what happened?
Late pickups increased.
They did. Instead of discouraging the behavior, the fines actually increased late pickups.
Oh, wow.
Because parents just saw it as a fee for a convenient service.
So it seems like designing effective incentives requires anticipating how people might respond both positively and negatively.
Absolutely. You got to think several steps ahead and consider all the possible reactions.
Now, for one that we've all experienced,
Oh, yeah.
the dreaded sunk cost fallacy, you know that feeling of, I've invested so much already, I can't give up now, even when it's clearly not the best decision anymore.
We've all been there.
Yeah. We tend to overvalue our past investments, whether it's time, money, or effort.
Right.
Even when it's no longer serving us.
It's hard to let go.
It is, and I'm totally guilty of this. So I once went to a concert. I'd already paid for the tickets, but I was exhausted. I really didn't feel like going, but I just couldn't let go of that sunk cost.
I feel that.
So how do we break free from this mental trap?
The key is to focus on the present and the future, not on the past. Ask yourself, if I were starting from scratch today, knowing what I know now, would I still make this choice?
That is such a good question to ask.
Right.
It helps to detach ourselves from those past investments and make decisions that are truly aligned with our current needs and goals.
Exactly. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've only just scratched the surface of all the fascinating ways that our thinking can go awry.
I know, right? I'm already starting to see these biases everywhere. We've got a lot more to unpack, so stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into the art of thinking clearly.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Welcome back. Let's continue exploring these thinking errors that Rolf Dobelli lays out in The Art of Thinking Clearly. And remember, we're all susceptible to them.
Oh, I'm ready for more mental detox. We've already uncovered some pretty sneaky biases. What's up next?
Well, let's talk about the story biases. It's this fascinating tendency we have to create narratives and see patterns even where none actually exist.
Oh, yeah, like we're hardwired to find meaning, and connect the dots.
Exactly. It's like seeing shapes in the clouds or, finding patterns in random events. Our brains just love a good story.
They do. Yeah.
And while this ability helps us make sense of the world, it can also lead us astray.
Okay, how so?
Well, we might oversimplify complex situations, cling to narratives that confirm our existing beliefs, or even ignore evidence that contradicts our favorite stories.
Oh, so we kind of create our own reality sometimes.
In a way, yeah.
So how can we avoid falling for this story bias?
Well, be skeptical of simple explanations. Embrace nuance. Be open to different perspectives. And don't be afraid to challenge your own narratives.
Okay, so question everything, even our own stories.
Exactly.
Okay, this next one feels very relatable. The hindsight bias, also known as the I knew it all along phenomenon.
Oh, yeah, we've all experienced this one. Once we know the outcome of something, it seems so obvious and predictable in retrospect.
It's like watching a movie for the second time. Knowing the ending makes it feel like the plot was inevitable all along.
Right, but this bias can be dangerous. It distorts our perception of risk and hinders our ability to learn from past mistakes.
So how do we counteract this I knew it all along feeling?
Well, actively try to remember your predictions before you knew the outcome, or consider alternative scenarios that could have happened. You might be surprised how unpredictable things actually were.
Okay, so challenge those assumptions. Now let's talk about the overconfidence effect. Now, a little bit of confidence is a good thing,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. But Dobelli warns us about the dangers of overconfidence, especially when we have limited knowledge in a particular area.
Okay.
Think about those people who are convinced they can beat the stock market or predict the next big thing.
It's like that saying, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Exactly. We might think we know more than we actually do.
Right.
And that overconfidence can lead to some pretty bad decisions.
So how do we find that balance?
Be more realistic about our limitations. Seek feedback from others and acknowledge the role of luck in our successes.
Okay, so stay humble.
Exactly.
This next one seems especially relevant in today's world of information overload. The availability bias.
Oh, yeah. This is a big one. It's the tendency to overestimate the likelihood of events that are easily recalled, those that are vivid, dramatic, or widely reported.
Like being more afraid of plane crashes than car crashes, even though statistically driving is much more dangerous.
Right? Plane crashes are just more sensational and memorable, so they stick in our minds.
They do. So are we being manipulated by the media?
Not necessarily, but our brains are taking mental shortcuts, relying on what's easily accessible in our memory, even if it's not an accurate representation of reality.
Okay, so how do we overcome this bias?
Actively seek out a wider range of information, not just the stuff that grabs our attention. Be willing to dig deeper and consider less dramatic, but potentially more important information.
Okay, so challenge those easy assumptions. Okay, the anchoring effect sounds interesting. What is that all about?
Well, it's our susceptibility to be influenced by irrelevant information, even when we know it's irrelevant.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Give me an example.
Okay, so Dobelli illustrates this with the example of a roulette wheel. So imagine it spins and lands on the number 10.
Okay.
Now, if someone asks you to estimate the percentage of African countries in the UN, your guess will likely be influenced by that random number 10.
Oh, wow, that's so weird. But I can see how it would happen. Our brains latch onto these arbitrary anchors, even if they have nothing to do with the question at hand.
Exactly. And this bias can affect all sorts of decisions, from negotiating prices to making investments.
So how do we avoid this trap?
Well, by being aware of it, for one thing.
Okay.
And then consciously try to detach from that irrelevant information and make more objective judgments.
Now, for a fallacy that might hit close to home for those of us who like to, plan ahead, the induction fallacy.
Ah, yes, the allure of predicting the future. It's our inclination to assume that patterns from the past will continue into the future.
Like believing a stock that has been going up will continue to go up, or assuming a company's past success guarantees future success.
Right. We see this a lot in financial markets. But it can affect any decision where we rely on past trends to predict future outcomes.
But as they say, past performance is not indicative of future results. So how can we avoid falling into this trap?
Be skeptical of simple extrapolations. Embrace the fact that the future is inherently uncertain. And be open to considering a range of possibilities, not just those that fit neatly with past trends.
So basically, don't get too comfortable with those patterns.
Exactly.
Next up is loss aversion. Is this why losing money feels so much worse than gaining the same amount?
It is, yeah. Dobelli points out that we feel the pain of a loss more intensely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, so think about the feeling of finding $100 versus losing $100. Which one evokes a stronger emotional response?
Oh, losing it for sure.
Right. And this inherent loss aversion affects our decision-making in all sorts of ways.
Like how?
We might avoid taking risks even when the potential rewards outweigh the risks. Or we might hold on to losing investments for too long because we just can't stomach the thought of selling at a loss.
So how do we counteract this deeply ingrained loss aversion?
Try reframing your decisions. Instead of focusing on the potential loss, shift your attention to the potential gain. Or consider the long-term consequences, not just the immediate impact.
So think big picture.
Exactly.
Let's talk about social loafing. Is this why group projects can be so frustrating?
It's certainly part of it, yeah.
Okay, what is it?
Social loafing is the tendency for individuals to put in less effort when they're part of a group. It's that someone else will take care of it mentality.
Oh yeah, I've definitely seen that happen. We see this in team sports group assignments, even in social movements.
Exactly, and it can be really detrimental to the group's overall performance.
So how do we prevent it?
Well, to counteract social loafing, it's crucial to clearly define individual roles and responsibilities. Make sure everyone knows what they're accountable for.
Okay, so clear expectations.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, exponential growth biases sounds a bit intimidating. Math was never my strong suit.
Don't worry, it's a simple concept with profound implications. It's our tendency to underestimate the power of exponential growth.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine a lily pad in a pond that doubles in size every day.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
If it covers half the pond on day 47, when will it cover the entire pond?
Let me think, day 48.
Exactly. Exponential growth sneaks up on us. We tend to think linearly, but exponential curves can be very deceptive.
And this bias can have big consequences, right? Especially when it comes to issues like population growth or the spread of a virus.
Absolutely. So it's essential to develop a better understanding of exponential growth, perhaps through visualizations or simulations, and to take early action. Not wait until a problem has spiraled out of control.
Okay, so think ahead. Don't wait till the last minute. This next one sounds a bit paradoxical. The winner's curse.
Yeah, it's a phenomenon that often occurs in auctions. The winner, while thrilled to have won, might actually end up overpaying for the item.
How does that happen?
Well, everyone at an auction has a different valuation of the item, right? The winner is simply the person with the highest valuation, which could be significantly above the average of the true value.
Oh, so they win, but end up paying more than the item is actually worth.
Exactly.
So how do we avoid this curse?
Be realistic about your own valuation. Set a maximum price you're willing to pay, and be prepared to walk away if the bidding exceeds that limit.
Okay, good advice. Now, for a bias that can affect how we perceive others, the fundamental attribution error.
Ah, yes, this is a classic. It's our tendency to overestimate the role of personality and underestimate the role of situation in explaining other people's behavior.
Like assuming someone who cuts us off in traffic is a jerk without considering that they might be having a really bad day or rushing to an emergency.
Exactly. We jump to conclusions about their character without considering all the external factors that might be influencing their actions.
So how do we counteract this tendency?
Practice giving people the benefit of the doubt. Consider the context. Acknowledge the power of situational influences. Yeah. And remember, you don't always have the full picture.
Okay, so pause before you judge.
Exactly.
Okay, false causality seems pretty self-explanatory.
It is, yeah. It's the mistake of assuming that because two things happen together, one caused the other.
Oh, right. Correlation does not equal causation.
Exactly. Just because two events are correlated doesn't mean they're causally linked.
We see this a lot in the media, right? Headlines might say, study shows eating chocolate reduces stress, but that doesn't necessarily mean one caused the other.
Right. Perhaps people who eat chocolate are just generally happier people.
Makes sense.
So it's crucial to be skeptical of those simple explanations and consider alternative possibilities.
Okay, so dig a little deeper. Let's talk about the halo effect. I think we see this a lot with celebrities.
Oh yeah, it's our tendency to generalize from one positive trait to other positive traits. If we find someone attractive, we might also assume they're intelligent, kind, and trustworthy.
But of course, that's not always the case.
Right. The halo effect can lead us to make flawed judgments. Whether we're hiring someone, choosing a romantic partner, or even investing in a company.
So how do we avoid this trap?
Evaluate each trait independently. Don't let one positive characteristic blind you to potential negative qualities.
Okay, alternative paths sounds interesting. What's that all about?
What's about recognizing that success stories often focus on the path that led to the outcome, while ignoring all the many other paths that could have led to the same result?
Oh, it's like survivorship bias. We only hear about the winners, not all the people who took different paths and didn't achieve the same level of success.
Exactly. We might overestimate the importance of certain choices and underestimate the role of chance and circumstance.
So how do we avoid falling into this trap?
Acknowledge that success is often a combination of factors, including luck. Consider alternative paths that might have led to similar outcomes. And be humble about your own achievements.
Okay, so broaden our perspective. This next one might be especially relevant for those of us who like to plan ahead. The forecast illusion.
Ah, yes. Our futile attempts to predict the future.
Right.
It's our tendency to be overly optimistic about our predictions,
Yeah.
especially when dealing with complex systems. We think we can foresee the future, but we're often wrong.
Yeah. We see this in politics, economics, even in our personal lives.
Yes, and the consequences of these flawed predictions can be significant, impacting investment decisions, career choices, or even, major life events like planning a wedding.
So how do we become better forecasters?
Embrace the uncertainty of the future. Consider a range of scenarios. Be prepared to adapt when things don't go as planned. And be realistic about your ability to predict the future.
Okay, so expect the unexpected.
Exactly.
Now for a real brain twister, the conjunction fallacy.
This one's fun. It highlights how easily our intuition can mislead us. We tend to assume that specific events are more likely than general events, even though that's logically impossible.
Wait, what? Give me an example.
Okay, so Dobelli uses this story of Linda, a fictional character who's described as being passionate about social justice and having studied philosophy.
Okay.
Now, when people are asked, which is more likely that Linda is a bank teller or that Linda is a bank teller and a feminist, most people choose the second option.
Because it fits the description right, but it's actually less likely.
Exactly. The conjunction of two events can never be more probable than one of those events occurring on its own.
Okay, so we need to think about probabilities logically, not just rely on those gut feelings that might lead us astray.
Exactly. Sometimes our intuitions can contradict basic logic.
Next up is the framing effect. This sounds like something marketers would be interested in.
Oh, it definitely is. Is the idea that the way information is presented, the frame can influence our choices, even if the underlying information remains the same.
Oh, I know this one. It's like saying a surgery has a 90% survival rate sounds much better than saying it has a 10% mortality rate, even though they mean the same thing.
Exactly. We're more likely to choose the positively framed option, even if the choices are objectively identical.
So being aware of the framing effect can help us make more objective decisions, right?
Absolutely. Focus on the underlying data, not just the way it's presented. Consider how the information might be framed differently and challenge those initial gut reactions.
Now for a bias that can affect our actions, action bias.
Ah, yes, the urge to do something. It's the tendency to feel compelled to do something, anything, even when doing nothing is the better option.
Oh, we see this a lot in financial markets, right? Investors feel pressured to buy or sell even when the market is volatile.
Exactly. We might think action demonstrates, decisiveness and control. But sometimes patience and inaction are the wiser choices.
So recognizing that inaction can be a valid choice is important. How can we overcome this action bias?
By carefully considering the costs and benefits of both action and inaction. Sometimes waiting and observing is the most strategic move.
Omission biases sounds like the opposite of action bias.
In a way, it is. It's our tendency to judge harmful actions as worse than equally harmful inactions, even if they result in the same outcome.
Okay, that's interesting. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine a scenario where a doctor could administer a life-saving treatment, but chooses not to. We might judge that inaction more harshly than a doctor who administers a treatment that turns out to be harmful, even if both situations result in the patient's death.
So we tend to place more moral weight on actions than on inactions, even if the outcomes are the same.
Exactly. It's important to consider the consequences of both actions and inactions, and to judge situations based on outcomes, not just on intentions.
Okay, self-serving biases sounds like a pretty classic human flaw.
It is. It's our tendency to attribute our successes to our own abilities and our failures to external factors.
Oh, like taking credit when things go well and blaming others when they don't.
Precisely, it's a way of protecting our egos. But it can prevent us from learning from our mistakes and taking responsibility for our actions.
So how do we avoid falling into this trap?
Practice honest self-reflection. Seek feedback from others, and be willing to acknowledge your own shortcomings. Remember, success is often a combination of factors, both internal and external.
Okay, the hedonic treadmill sounds a bit depressing. Is this why happiness can feel so fleeting?
It's part of it, yeah. It's our tendency to quickly adapt to changes in our circumstances, both positive and negative.
Yeah.
We might think that winning the lottery or getting a promotion will make us happy forever.
Yeah.
But research suggests we quickly adjust to our new reality, and our happiness levels kind of return to their baseline.
So it's like we're constantly chasing after happiness, but never quite catching it.
That's a good way to put it. So the key is to cultivate genuine contentment. By focusing on experiences rather than material possessions, practicing gratitude, and savoring the present moment.
So appreciate what we have. This next one sounds like a statistical concept, regression to the mean.
It's a statistical phenomenon, but it applies to many aspects of life.
Okay.
It's the idea that extreme events are often followed by more average events.
Oh, like a basketball player having an incredible game scoring way above their average is likely to score closer to their average in the following game.
Right. Those exceptional performances are often a combination of skill and luck. And over time, things tend to even out.
So how do we account for this bias in our decision making?
Don't overreact to outliers. Recognize that extreme performance, both good and bad, is often temporary. Focus on the long-term trend, not on the fluctuation.
To look for the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Okay, the chameleon effect sounds intriguing. Is this why we sometimes unconsciously mimic other people's behavior?
It's our natural tendency to mirror other people's postures, mannerisms, even speech patterns.
Oh, like if someone yawns, we're more likely to yawn, or if someone smiles, we might unconsciously smile back.
Precisely. It's thought to be an instinctual way to build rapport and foster social connection.
Interesting. Next up is social proof. This seems especially relevant in today's world of social media and online reviews.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
our tendency to look to others for guidance, especially in situations where we're unsure how to behave.
Okay.
If we see a long line outside a restaurant or a product with thousands of positive reviews, we assume it must be good.
It's the classic wisdom of the crowd idea,
Right. And while social proof can be a useful shortcut, it can also lead us astray.
because the crowd isn't always right.
Exactly. So it's important to critically evaluate the source of this social proof and make decisions based on your own values and judgments, not just on what everyone else is doing.
Okay, so trust but verify.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of being influenced by others, let's talk about authority bias.
Yes, our tendency to defer to authority figures even when they might be wrong.
We see this in medicine, law, education, even in our personal relationships.
Exactly. Like blindly trusting a doctor's diagnosis or following a parent's advice without question. It's important to remember that authority figures are human. They make mistakes, and their expertise has limits.
So question everything.
Well, question authority, think for yourself, and make decisions based on evidence and reasoning, not just on someone's title or position.
Okay, so think critically, don't just blindly follow.
Exactly.
Next up is the contrast effect. This seems like something marketers might use to their advantage.
Oh, yeah, it's a classic marketing tactic. It's the idea that our perceptions are influenced by comparisons.
Okay.
A product might seem more appealing if it's presented next to a less desirable option, even if it's not that great on its own.
Like how a real estate agent might show you a rundown house first, so the next house you see seems amazing in comparison.
Exactly. And being aware of this contrast effect can help you make more objective judgments. Consider each option independently. Don't let those comparisons manipulate your perceptions of value.
Let's talk about the scarcity error. This one feels very familiar.
Oh, yeah, we've all fallen for this one. It's our tendency to overvalue things that are scarce or in limited supply.
It's why marketers love those limited time offers and while supplies last, promotions.
Exactly. Scarcity creates a sense of urgency, and it can trigger our fear of missing out, even if we don't really need the product.
So how do we avoid falling for this marketing trap?
Well, recognize the tactic for what it is. Question your motivations. Do you really want this item, or are you just reacting to the perceived scarcity? Make decisions based on your genuine needs and values, not on artificial scarcity.
Okay, base rate neglect sounds like a statistical concept. Can you break it down for us?
Sure, it's our tendency to ignore general information, the base rate, and focus on specific information, even when the general information is more relevant.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. Can you give me an example?
Okay, imagine a medical test that's 99% accurate for detecting a rare disease.
Okay.
Now, if you test positive, you might assume you have the disease right.
Yeah, that seems logical.
But what if that disease only affects 1 in 10,000 people? Even with a 99% accurate test, you're actually much more likely to be healthy because the base rate of the disease is so low.
So the specific information, the positive test, is misleading without considering the general information, the rarity of the disease.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of considering both the base rate and the specific information when making decisions.
Now, for a fallacy that's all too common in gambling, the gambler's fallacy.
Ah, yes, the belief that random events have a memory.
Right.
It's the mistaken belief that past events can influence future random events.
Like thinking that if a coin has landed on heads 5 times in a row, it's more likely to land on tails next time.
Exactly. Each coin flip is an independent event, unaffected by previous outcomes.
So we need to remember that in truly random events, the past doesn't predict the future.
Right. Don't let those past outcomes influence your betting decisions.
Okay, neglect of probability sounds a bit abstract.
It's our tendency to be insensitive to probabilities, especially when they're small or difficult to grasp.
Yeah.
We might worry about extremely rare events or invest in ventures with a low probability of success because we fail to accurately assess the risks.
So it's about developing a better understanding of probabilities and using that understanding to guide our decisions.
Exactly. And remembering that low probabilities don't mean impossible.
Zero risk bias. This sounds like something we all strive for.
It is, yeah. It's our tendency to prefer eliminating a small risk entirely, even if it means increasing a larger risk.
Really? Like how?
Okay, we might spend a fortune to make our homes completely childproof while neglecting the much higher risk of car accidents.
So it's about prioritizing risks appropriately,
Yeah.
not aiming for the impossible goal of eliminating all risks entirely.
Exactly. Recognize that zero risk is often an illusion. Focus on managing and mitigating the most significant risks.
Okay, this next one seems particularly relevant in today's world of viral information, the availability cascade.
Oh yeah, this is a big one. It's the idea that a belief can become more widespread and accepted simply because it's repeated often enough regardless of its actual validity.
So a story or a claim, even if it's based on flimsy evidence, can gain traction and become accepted as truth simply because it's circulating widely.
Exactly. We see this all the time in the media, with stories getting amplified and repeated, even if they lack factual basis.
So how do we avoid being swept up in these availability cascades?
Be critical of the information you consume. Check sources. Consider alternative perspectives. And don't believe everything you hear just because it's being repeated ad nauseum.
Okay, this next one, introspection illusion, seems like a challenge to self-awareness.
It's our tendency to overestimate our ability to understand our own motivations and beliefs.
So we think we know why we do the things we do, but often our explanations are just rationalizations, not accurate reflections of our true motives.
Exactly. Our minds are great at creating stories,
Mm.
but those stories don't always align with reality.
So we're not always the best judges of our own character.
We're not.
How do we overcome this illusion?
Be willing to seek feedback from others. And be open to the possibility that you might be wrong about yourself. Remember, self-perception can be a tricky thing.
The effect heuristic sounds intriguing. What is that all about?
It's the idea that our emotions can unconsciously influence our judgments and decisions, even when we think we're being perfectly rational.
So we might make decisions based on how we feel about something rather than on the actual facts.
Exactly. We might overestimate the benefits and underestimate the risks of something we feel positively about, or vice versa.
So how can we become more aware of this influence of emotions?
Well, pay attention to those gut feelings and ask yourself if they're clouding your judgment. Try to detach from the emotional aspects of a decision and focus on the objective facts.
Groupthink sounds like something that could be detrimental in a work environment.
Oh, it definitely can be. It's the tendency for groups to make bad decisions due to social pressure and a desire for conformity.
So people might suppress their dissenting opinions, avoid conflict, and go along with the group's decision even if they have doubts.
Exactly. And to combat groupthink, it's crucial to encourage healthy debate and dissent within the group. Seek out diverse perspectives, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
Okay, so speak up. Don't be afraid to disagree.
Exactly.
Neglect of probability. Haven't we already covered this one?
We touched on it briefly, but it's worth revisiting because it's so pervasive. It's our tendency to misjudge probabilities, especially when dealing with small or abstract risks.
Right, so we might overestimate the likelihood of rare events or underestimate the risks of common events?
Exactly. It's about developing a better understanding of probabilities and using that understanding to guide our decisions.
Pseudo-certainty effect sounds like a mouthful.
It describes our tendency to be more risk-averse when trying to avoid a loss than when trying to achieve a gain, even if the probabilities are the same.
Okay, that sounds a little confusing. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine you're given the option to invest in a venture that has a 50% chance of doubling your money and a 50% chance of losing half your money.
That sounds risky.
Now imagine you're offered a lottery ticket that guarantees you won't lose any money, but has a very small chance of winning a large sum.
That sounds more appealing even though both options involve risk.
Exactly. We're often willing to take bigger risks to avoid a loss than to achieve a gain. even if the probabilities are the same.
Interesting. So being aware of this bias can help us make more rational decisions about risk.
Right. Sometimes our fear of loss can really override our logic.
Information biases in today's world, that seems like an easy trap to fall into.
It's our tendency to seek out information even when it's not useful for making a decision.
So we might spend hours researching a product even when the choice is straightforward, or overload ourselves with news and data that doesn't actually improve our decision making.
Exactly. More information is not always better. It's about focusing on the information that is relevant to your decision, not just consuming information for the sake of it.
Okay, so be selective about what you consume.
Exactly.
Effort justification. This sounds like it could apply to everything from hobbies to relationships.
It's our tendency to value things more highly if we've put a lot of effort into them.
Like that saying, we love what we suffer for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We might cling to a project, a possession, or even a relationship simply because we've invested a lot of time and energy, even if it's no longer serving us.
So how can we avoid this trap of overvaluing our efforts?
Be willing to detach from your sunk costs and assess the current value of something, regardless of the effort you've already put in. Ask yourself, if I were starting from scratch today, would I still choose this?
Okay, the law of small numbers. This sounds like another statistical concept.
It highlights our tendency to draw conclusions from small samples, even though small samples are often unreliable and prone to random variation.
Like forming an opinion about an entire city based on one bad experience.
Exactly. Or assuming a trend based on a few anecdotal examples.
So the lesson here is to be cautious about drawing conclusions from limited data.
Right. Look for larger data sets, be wary of outliers. And remember that small samples are often not representative of the bigger picture.
The conjunction fallacy. Haven't we already covered this one?
We discussed it earlier, but it's a bias worth revisiting.
It's our tendency to overestimate the probability of events that are described in vivid detail, even if those details make the event statistically less likely.
So a story that's more detailed and engaging might feel more probable, even if it's actually less likely to occur.
Exactly. Being aware of this fallacy can help us make more rational judgments about probability, separating the compelling narrative from the actual statistical likelihood.
This next one seems particularly relevant to advertising and persuasion, the framing effect.
It's the idea that the way information is presented can influence our choices, even if the underlying information remains the same.
Like how a product might seem more appealing if it's described in positive terms, even if the product itself hasn't changed.
Exactly. Marketers and politicians are masters of framing. It's about being able to see through the framing, recognizing how it might be manipulating our perceptions and making decisions based on the underlying substance, not on the presentation. Okay, overconfidence bias. I think we've all encountered this one.
Oh yeah, it's a classic. It's our tendency to overestimate our abilities and our knowledge.
We think we're better drivers, investors, and decision makers than we actually are.
Exactly. It's a cognitive bias that can lead us to take unnecessary risks and make poor judgments. So being aware of this overconfidence bias, seeking feedback from others, and recognizing our limitations can help us make more realistic assessments of our abilities.
Wow, this is a lot to absorb. My brain is definitely getting a workout today.
I know, right?
Oh,
But remember, the key is to be aware of these thinking errors and to apply these insights to your own life and decisions.
I'm already starting to see the world and my own thinking in a new light. But we're not done yet. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive into the art of thinking clearly, where we'll explore even more fascinating ways our brains can trip us up. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Rolf Dobelli's The Art of Thinking Clearly. And we've got some more, fascinating insights into the quirks of the human mind to cover.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground already, but there are still some crucial thinking errors that we haven't tackled yet.
Mm.
And remember, the goal is to be more aware of these biases so that we can make better decisions in all areas of our lives.
I'm ready for, more mental detox. What other thinking traps should we watch out for?
Well, let's talk about the illusion of control. This bias makes us think we have more influence over outcomes than we actually do.
Oh, I totally relate to this one. It's like when I throw dice harder if I want a high number, or I try to, will my favorite sports team to victory.
We all do it. But, this illusion can be dangerous because it can lead to unnecessary risks and poor planning.
How so?
Well, if you overestimate your control over a situation, you might not prepare for potential setbacks or consider, alternative outcomes.
So how can we avoid this trap?
Recognize that chance plays a role in almost everything. Focus on what you can control. Your efforts, your preparation, your attitude, and accept that some things are simply beyond your influence.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, we've talked about incentives before, but Dobelli keeps coming back to this idea. What's so important about understanding incentives?
Well, Dobelli calls it incentive super response tendency, and it's a powerful force that shapes human behavior. We're all motivated by incentives, but those motivations don't always lead to the outcomes we expect.
Right. It's like that cobra breeding example we discussed earlier. The British government's attempt to reduce the cobra population by offering a bounty totally backfired.
Yeah, people respond to incentives in creative and sometimes unpredictable ways.
Hmm.
So when designing incentives, it's crucial to think several steps ahead and consider the potential unintended consequences.
So how do we do that?
Ask yourself, how might people exploit this system? What behaviors might it encourage or discourage?
So it's not just about offering rewards or punishments, it's about understanding the complex interplay of motivations and how they can shape people's actions.
Exactly. Getting the incentives right is key to achieving your desired outcomes. Whether you're managing a team, designing a policy, or even raising children.
Okay, now for a bias that can affect, how we evaluate decisions, outcome biases.
Yeah, this is a common one. It's our tendency to judge a decision based on its outcome rather than on the quality of the decision-making process itself.
So if someone makes a risky investment that happens to pay off big, we might praise them for their genius, even if the decision was based on, a lucky guess or a gut feeling.
Exactly. And conversely, if a well-reasoned decision based on, careful analysis and sound logic leads to a negative outcome, we might unfairly criticize the decision maker, even though they did everything right.
It's like saying the ends justify the means, even if the means were, reckless or unethical.
Right. It's important to separate the outcome from the process, evaluate decisions based on the information that was available at the time, the reasoning behind the choice, and the thoroughness of the process, not just on the ultimate result.
So it's about judging the quality of the thinking, not just the look of the draw.
Exactly. And recognizing that even good decisions can sometimes lead to bad outcomes and vice versa.
Okay, this next one feels very relevant to our modern lives. Paradox of choice. We're constantly bombarded with options, which phone to buy, which streaming service to subscribe to, which coffee to order.
Right. And we often assume that more choice is always better. But research suggests otherwise.
Really?
Too many options can actually lead to decision paralysis, anxiety, and even decreased satisfaction with our choices.
It's like standing in front of a wall of cereal boxes at the grocery store, feeling completely overwhelmed,
Okay.
or spending hours agonizing over which movie to watch on Netflix.
Exactly. We might second guess ourselves, worry about making the wrong choice, or even regret our decisions later on.
So how do we navigate this paradox of choice?
Simplify, set clear priorities, limit your options, focus on what truly matters to you, and don't get bogged down by an endless array of possibilities.
That sounds like good advice for life in general. Simplify, prioritize, focus.
Absolutely.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the art of thinking clearly. It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. I hope you've gained some valuable insights into how your mind works and how to avoid, those common thinking traps that can lead to bad decisions.
I know. I'm already starting to catch myself falling into these biases, and I'm learning to question my assumptions and look at things from, different perspectives.
That's the key. Awareness
Mm-hmm.
is the first step towards better thinking. And remember, we're all susceptible to these errors, but by understanding them, we can become more rational, more deliberate, and ultimately make choices that are more aligned with our goals and values.
It's like we've been given this, mental toolkit to de-bias our thinking and navigate the world with more clarity and confidence.
Exactly. And remember, the journey to clear thinking is ongoing. There's always more to learn, more to discover about the fascinating ways our brains work.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the art of thinking clearly with us. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and those thinking caps on.